Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode. An interesting title arose last night in a Discord discussion. I thought about what is the pre-state of hatred. You know, we human beings pretty much are reality, the worlds we find ourselves. It's kind of divided between love and hate, a major duality. That's one of the biggest dualities on this planet. That means if you're a human being, if you have a human mind, most likely you have been engaged in the games of love and hate to some degree, whether it's the absence of desire or the fulfillment of desire. So in this episode, I thought about, how many people talk about hatred. They talk about fighting, resisting hatred, of course, but how many people try to understand what hatred is? And so I thought I'd give an attempt and try to share with the listeners how I understand the concept, and really how the concept's also understood outside of my own domain of thinking. I will begin by reading something for the audience. And so, as soon as I find the page, you see, I was looking at hatred just as a definition, as what is it, how is it understood, and then I was looking at hatred in regards to how does psychology explain it, right? And so I want to read something for the listeners here. And pretty much my approach to this episode is, first I'm going to speak about what is hatred, and then I have seen 3 stages to hatred, a sort of beginning, middle, end, and how the end of hatred can suggest if there's going to be future hatred or not. So firstly, hatred is an emotion. And so its definition is, hatred is a very angry emotional response to certain people or ideas. Hatred is often associated with intense feelings of anger and disgust. So if we were to understand from the perspective of just an emotion, as an emotion, it says hatred can be short-lived or long-lasting. It can be of low intensity. For example, I hate broccoli, or high intensity, I hate the whole world. In some cases, hatred can be a learned response from external influences, such as from being abused, misled, or manipulated. As a general rule, hatred is the deep psychological response to feeling trapped or being unable to understand certain sociological phenomena. That means, guys, even confusion can lead to hatred. Robert Sternberg saw 3 main elements in hatred. So Robert Sternberg, he perceives that first there's a negation of intimacy by creating distance when closeness had become threatening. An infusion of passion, such as fear or anger. A decision to devalue a previously valued object. The important self-protective function to be found in hatred can be illustrated by Steinberg's analysis of mutinous hatred, whereby a dependent relationship is repudiated in a quest for autonomy. So the idea is that hatred could be as if something is taken away, and we're trying to balance the scales. And I'm going to use, Mr.Within's inner and outer realmism to kind of explain this more deeply as we get to the end of the talk. So that was Robert Sternberg, his view on sort of hatred having 3 dimensions, or 3 main elements. And then we have another psychologist, Sigmund Freud, of course. He says defined hate as an ego state that wishes to destroy the source of its unhappiness, stressing that it was linked to the question of self-preservation. All right, so before I read any more from this, guys, I'm going to actually show you a picture, and first I'm going to start from the outer realms and explain to people the physiological. That means what is happening in the brain, right? Just a second. Guys, I had found so many great pictures that I closed the tab. Just hang on, you know, there's so you see, guys, the human brain has developed over time. Different parts of the human brain have developed differently. We have more, you can say, the older part of our brain, a part of our brain called the amygdala. I'm looking for the picture here for you. Hang in there, guys. I'm just trying to find the diagram for you. Okay, I found a picture. I think this could be enough. So if people look at this, they see the anatomy of hate, the amygdala, part of the limbic system, motivation, emotion, survival, and reproduction, size of a grape under each temple, oldest part of the brain. Yeah, so different parts of the brain develop differently. You know, we were first, I mean, just think about it in the sense that we were animals in nature, right? And then these animals had a sort of fight or flight reflex of the survival instinct, and the fight or flight remix comes from the amygdala. You see, that means hatred could be more of an animalistic reaction to actually a state where there is access to intelligence beyond an animal. So you can totally see, for example, animals in nature, when they eat, when they steal each other's food, they fight, you know. And so it's not really an emotion at that point. I mean, it's not like I can say animals don't have emotions, but I can say animals are not conscious of their emotions. The human being is an animal that is conscious of its emotion. That means in the middle of its anger, it can notice it's angry. In the middle of its hatred, it can notice it's hating. In the middle of its loving, you know, whether blindly or not, it can notice it's, in some sense, loving, right? So pretty much the brain, through millions of years, different parts of it developed. The more older animal brain is where, you know, hatred and, in some sense, the emotion is being considered to be arising from. That means survival instincts meshed with emotions of self-preservation of identity. So physiologically, how we should think about hate is that our brains were in a way more intense circumstance. And from this intense circumstance, you know, they completely changed gears. You know, we became a civilized creature. But hatred is still in the animal. So in some sense, it's like hatred is releasing the animal within. Anger is releasing the animal within. And it's so easy for a person to be an animal, by the way, guys. You know, like I had a, you know, if you especially have a twin brother, and you and your twin brother both have an ego, you're gonna see this kind of, you know, you know, temporary hatred, you know, while growing up will arise in certain moments, you know. But hatred is really about the permission for the moment to continue ultimately. That's what I think, but I'm gonna try to somehow share different perspectives on this. So the brain developed differently. Different parts of it. A certain part of our brain is the reason why we go into fight or flight, and you can say hatred is a sort of fighting psychology, you know. I would say, in some sense, even if a person flights, so imagine fight or flight. So let's say you're a person, you get into a situation, and the situation's really messed up. You have an option of confronting the situation, fighting the situation, going through, or you have a opportunity to run away if you feel you're going to be destroyed or something, right? So imagine both a human being that fights. The idea is that the inner realms have an expectation of the moment. If that expectation isn't met, a level of survival intensity comes into the picture. You know, you can, for example, say if somebody, let's say a parent hits a child, you know, for no reason. Let's say a parent is just pissed off at the world and takes it out on their child, right? That child will not have a chance, for example, to fight back and has to like run away or hide in its insecurity or whatnot, and that leads to hatred. So I don't think we realize it, but I think the biggest reason why there's hatred in human society is because people's inner realms are being cut off. That means, let's say somebody was about to be first place, you know, then like somebody pushes them on the ground in a running race and they become first place. Why would that person who didn't become first place have hatred? Because the inner realms destination and also even the outer realms destination was interfered with. You can say hatred is when something else interferes with your own mind, and the mind gets a sense of, I'm gonna push it back. How dare something in this world touch me? You know, like we become an animal. If the audience and the viewers just look at the screen for a moment, I found a different picture. This is the picture of the brain in a simplified version, and people have to understand the challenge of trying to map the brain, right? Because it's kind of like neural, meaningless atomic movement that is somehow being ascribed to arbitrary personality. That means it's as if when a human being comes to discover how the brain is becoming personality, there has to be an incredible leap of faith of how we identify movement and the changes in brain states as personality. That is like a very complex task, to be honest. That means neurologists may in the future, not neurologists, but I would say neuropsychologists would have the most incredible pressure on them in the future. So far the idea, the way I'm trying to develop is the idea is that hatred is an emotion. It's an emotion that comes when it's like the post-eventhood, like something happens and then the person hates. You know, it's as if somebody once said, we only hate those we love, you know, and it took me a while to understand that sentence. Why would someone say, like, you know, let's say there's a person's walking in the street, or you could say a couple, let's say a couple has broken up, right, and their breakup was tragic. And in how they broke up, they pass each other, and when they see each other in the street, let's say there's a bit of hatred in their eyes when they look at each other, right? But a random person walking in the street, the couple doesn't care, the couple doesn't have an opinion. That means it's something that we consciously select, and then when there's an interference in our conscious going forward in that selection, then we hate, right? That means so many people actually can't hate. Like, here's the thing, we can't really, this is a really deep philosophical idea, I would say, but theoretically we can never hate or love anyone. Why? Because we don't see them, right? We can hate their consequence of their actions. Like somebody gives a bad talk, people in the comment section, they make it clear, yeah man, I hate your talk, and you're like, thank you. It's as if human beings, if we were to look at the purpose of life, it is some sort of conscious activity, pretty much, right? And so, what happens to human psychology when it wakes up in the morning? So it finds itself. Let's just say, for speech's sake, let's say the mind in the morning finds itself neutral. When a person wakes up, they're still in like that semi wakeful state where they don't care about the outer realms yet. So when a person wakes up, let's say there's a neutral state of mind, neither good, neither bad, no dualistic imposition. Now let's say the person is walking outside and then it suddenly starts raining and they don't have an umbrella. It's as if an event takes place. The result of the self in the event can lead to an inefficient perception or an efficient perception. There is a quote from a man named Sogyal Rinpoche, or Patrol Rinpoche, I'm not sure which gentleman it is, but one of these two sages, wise men from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, says that unless you conquer anger, your enemies will be inexhaustible. And most people hate their enemies, but they don't realize that the enemy is actually your mind's formation. And I would say a way a person can get out of hate and love is that they hate and love so much until they suddenly discover a new reality. Because I'm telling you, a person can hate themselves also for loving the wrong thing. Imagine, probably there's so many human beings that have invested in relationships, and then the other partner in the relationship, for example, cheats, And so it's as if something that was building up as love, the moment its future is denied, becomes hate. So the simplest way I could say is hatred is when the future is denied. When the future of the mind's projection is denied, And pretty much we can't ignore children's psychology, guys. We've all been children, and when we are children, what do we notice in the child's psychology? Child is given a toy, it smiles. It's taken away the toil, it's taken away, the toy is taken away, and the child screams, cries, oh my God. The moment you give the toy back, the child doesn't even have a personality yet, but suddenly becomes happy, right? So in regards to physiological, physiological dimension to hate, it's as if when the body can't move, we hate those states. That's why I think some people, they get paranoid in elevators, and the reason for the paranoia is they're hating how they're being to themselves. But for example, a yogi has surpassed that hatred. A yogi, for I would say, for a true transcendentalist, that has understood the value of the unknown, you can actually not hate the unknown because you don't know how it turns out. This is why the mystic automatically just loved the moment, and everything that was in the moment was being loved. That's an advanced level of compassion. Like the Dalai Lama, I think, is at a level of compassion. There could literally be like somebody insulting him, and he's just gonna love that person a bit more, as if thinking, man, those people who demonstrate hatred, they've literally been hurt. They are like the defeated ones. And it doesn't matter, you could be like a dictator and showing cruelty, and you're still a defeated psychology, right? That means there's some people who are trying to achieve things on this planet without tainting the motivation of their first effort. That means the person's trying to be a loving person, and then they're loving, something triggers them, they become the most hateful person. You're like, holy shit, where did that come from? And the answer is, it comes from the amygdala, and it comes from the lack of conscious ability. Anytime any human being from a human state of consciousness, usually hatred, anger, greed, these are qualities, emotions, guys, that they dehumanize. I don't know if people have noticed. It's not that money is evil. It's that, for example, too much focus in one dimension when life is multidimensional dehumanizes us. So many people, they look at society and they look at wealth, and they in some sense see it as a cause of suffering, right? But I would say it's as if, imagine we saw a stamp collector, right? We saw a stamp collector and we'd be like, yo, this stamp collector is a piece of shit, is ruining society, But now imagine stamps, it's money, It's another sort of paper. It's a numerical abstraction of an arbitrary force that is equivalent to physics. That means it's like, I don't know if scientists are considering the metaphysics to money, but in some sense it was, of course, in the history of economics, we were just pretty much changing stuff for stuff. Somebody had a shovel, somebody had some chickens, they would, I don't know, trade. I don't know how they would trade a shovel with a chicken, but but let's say whatever, they would objects would be exchanged for objects. Now objects are being exchanged for a specific object that has a numerical significance, right? And a lot of people in society, their hatred is not because they don't want to live in the world, it's because the world hasn't seen them. And this took me so long to realize, guys, that probably like 60% of hatred in the human mind is because the human mind hasn't been seen by the world, as if civilization hasn't been so advanced to be like, oh my god, there's a unique human being with a unique DNA here that can serve the realm. It's as if civilization isn't at that point yet, right? But that can cause hatred when you don't see. This is why I personally feel middle children in families, let's say there's a younger brother, middle brother, older brother, the middle brother has the biggest potential to become a dictator. That means the middle brother is seen by everyone to be calm, quiet, a good brother, but moment things go into the future, the middle brother has the biggest potential for kind of reserved chaos, right? Because really, human psychology has to express itself to be human, right? So let's say somebody is in the streets, singing, and somebody goes and says, don't sing here, right? And that becomes a sort of, I don't want to say it becomes hatred, but it becomes the unauthorization of nature, or something that was naturally perceived, right? And it has to do with the attachment of the inner realms, Like, I'm not, like, I wouldn't say I'm the politest person on the planet, but there has been moments where, like, messed up communication has come my way, and just by understanding the person never sees my eyes, I have been untouched. That means I have bypassed hatred by considering the person showing hatred to me as being ignorant. And not that I'm not saying, like, be a passive, like, bowl of jello where the wind blows away, I'm saying that, I'm not saying we shouldn't be incapable as a human being, but I'm saying that hatred is a poison. It's such an unnecessary karmic poison. It's literally causing a low quality moment. That means violent behavior. It's like, it's not the concept, it's not grow up. We don't just look at the violent person and say grow up. We look at the violent person and we're like, you have a mind after 4.5 billion years that you can use. Really? Does punching people seem like a bright idea? And hatred, I think, is actually a selfish way of thinking. It can't be selfless. Love is a selfless way of thinking. Those people who love, they don't care actually what happens to what they give. It's out of like a pleasantness for the vitality of the person. This is usually a love that's I would say on a family level. Do you know? Friendships, sure. Friendships like the movie, like what's it called? The show Friends. Do you know? Like sure, that was kind of like a family, you know. But I'm saying it's like those who have who are like, let's say there's three people in a room and person A and B know each other's inner realms, you know, so they have a sort of friendship. And then let's say person C, person A and B don't know person C's inner realm, right? And because they don't know person C's inner realm, what tends to happen in society is that if people don't express who they are, usually the environment expresses who they are. And mischievously. You know, it's kind of strange. It's as if it's a sort of survival of the fittest game, but because it is the survival of the fittest game, we don't want weakness around, right? So the species automatically goes towards strength, whether it's inner strength or outer strength, right? And why are we drawn to strength? Because strength achieves what weakness cannot. We can totally say that those people who hate anything, it could be that you hate others, it could be that you hate the world, or it could be that you hate the self. You know, anytime there is hatred, there is a hole in your ship and the ship is sinking. That means you could be like the most kindest, compassionate person, but if you have in some part of your psychology just a little thought like, I'd rather watch something get destroyed than created, then that archetype echoes in the psyche, right? You know, there's the concept of renunciation in both religion and mystical traditions, and many people feel renunciation means physically you renounce. Like, you know, you renounce eating a certain food, or you renounce a certain behavior. For example, monks in the Buddhist tradition, they have to do like 42 vows or something. I don't know what it is, but a ridiculous number of vows. And a vow, what is it? It's a declaration of how you're going to animate in the realm. So if a person vows they're going to give 10,000 talks, if a person vows that they're gonna like be celibate like a monk, like Buddhist monks are, right? That's a sort of physical renunciation, but in my personal view, it's really an inner renunciation of the dehumanized. That means in order to truly understand the human, we have to, in some sense, renounce that which makes the human ideal worthless, you know. Because in an instant, attitudes can change the axiology of meaning. That means the value of a meaning. Literally, it's an axis, right? That means if a person goes into a community, it's like, this is a good community. That's their value system. They don't know if the community is good or not, you know. Now, I'm going to continue reading something I was reading from the beginning about hatred. So so Sigmund Freud defined hate as an ego state that wishes to destroy the source of its unhappiness. What that means is hatred is a response to our future potential. If somebody is about to do something, they're stopped, hatred arises. You know, if somebody's about to, you know, succeed or is in a successful state and something else can take away their success, hatred arises, right? It's only those human beings who care for the collective victory that have no reason to hate, because they want the greater victory in the moment, not the personal victory of just the personal dimension, right? Because if I care for my own victory, sure, I could go on any hill and feel like a champion, you know, but but it's really the species We want to see an advanced species, a capable species, a species that is not just interstellar, but multidimensional behind its eyes. That means if extraterrestrials in the future landed and there was a mental invasion, we as a species in our inner realms, we are such sophisticated, advanced communicators that we instantly know what's going on. Right? Empathy can be said to be that which slowly makes the person realize how hatred is an inefficient method. That means there's literally no reason to hate anything in emptiness, you know? It's as if the militant atheist perceived that reality was in a giant void and the idea of God was man-made, and the militant atheist was like, I hate religious oppression, you know? But then suddenly realized if it's in emptiness, anything stands. Anything stands. That means it's kind of like, as Alan Watts says, an important idea in philosophy, which is inspired out of geometry, is that if two spheres were spinning around each other in a vacuum, which sphere is spinning around which, right? You can never know. So similarly, when it comes to value generation or meaning generation, who is to say that one person's meaning is less meaningful than another person's meaning? Right? All that I'm saying, really, we should as human beings implement in this current era as advanced communicators and pilots of the future is an inner realm, outer realm discrimination, and a filter. You know, I'm that person in history not saying believe this or that. I'm just saying look at life through the lens that there is an inner life and an outer life. And the inner life can instantly hate anything. You know, a person's live stream can for a second stall and they could be like, I hate my computer, you know. You can hate anything, you know, and believe it or not, you can love anything, but it depends how much we truly access the reality of the moment. Donald Winnicott highlighted the developmental step involved in hatred, with its recognition of an outside object. As compared to magical destruction, aggressive ideas and behavior take on a positive value, and hate becomes a sign of civilization. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, somebody could challenge me right now and be like, Mr.Within, let's say aliens were invading Earth and they were destroying our species. Is it okay to hate the aliens, you know? Or is hate still a poison? I would say in some contexts, if we say it's balance, right? That means it's as if you can call it hatred, or you can say you're just loving a balanced future. You know, I mean, of course, it's too intense. You know, the idea is hatred leads to destruction, love leads to construction, right? Like a bunch of human beings that loved people built hospitals. You know, a person that hated human beings didn't build a hospital. You know what I mean? But if a person hated human beings, they tried to dominate the world. They tried to dominate the freedom of the inner lives of people. You know, there has been dictators in history, and there has been religious dictatorships, of course. Now, sometimes I think if that religious dictator went to heaven, it's imagine as if God, for example, looks at the religious dictator and says, hey, you were down there in charge of many people's lives and you limited my creation. Do you know, like, God's wrath to those who deny life? It's as if it's expected. It's as if somebody destroys something in this world, you have literally put in an echo of a destructive archetype in your psyche, right? It's not that we are good so world is better. It's that we are good so we don't destroy ourselves from the better futures that we can deserve. And when I'm saying the pre-hatred state of mind, Donald Winnicott actually makes a major point about this. He says, with its recognition of an outside object, right? That means when you're alone, you can't really hate or love yourself. Your mind changes all the time. It's when the outer It's like the outer realms is it's like when the outer realms become significant, our inner realms response to the moment becomes hatred. I would say there is no hateful people and there is no loving people. There's just a creature on a rock that is moving in the space-time continuum. This creature starts as a watcher primarily, right? When we wake up in the morning, we're watching our world as some sort of moment of mind. Now, this watcher identifies with what moves in the moment. That means you can say soccer players can hate each other. They can hate the other team's players, right? But at the end of the game, at the end of that simulation of hate, right, they shake hands. The players are like, yeah, it was a fictitious game, you know? And when we realize the levels of fiction in our own hatred and the levels of non-fiction, right, then it's as if we ask ourselves what is best for the human being. That means it's not just, let's say it was the truth of human beings that human beings were cruel. Let's say that was a fact, okay? It's not, but let's say it's a fact. Let's say it was a fact that human nature was cruel, you know? Then it's as if we still have to ignore the truth and go towards the better efficient system. That means just because we figure out truth doesn't mean we gotta live in accordance to the dehumanized. You know, that's what I noticed happening in spiritual communities and metaphysical societies on the planet. It's as if it's imagination can be a reason not to be human, but it shouldn't be. It should be a reason to actually be human, you know, to be the greatest human you can ever know before you exit this realm. You know, check this out. In neurology, the neural correlates of hate have been investigated with an fMRI procedure. That the neural correlates of hate means it's like we took an MRI scan and we're like, yeah, this is what hatred, the personality of hatred kind of represents in the brain. It says in this experiment, people had their brains scanned while viewing pictures of people they hated. The results showed increased activity in the middle frontal gyrus, right putamen, bilaterally in the premotor cortex, in the frontal pole, and bilaterally in the medial insular cortex of the human brain. I mean, bilaterally, sure. The frontal cortex is like the frontal lobe of the brain is like the pilot, and the left and right hemispheres are the two different universes that are the wings of the plane of existence that the brain projects, right? You know, there is an approach to hate from ethno-linguistics, and it says hate, like love, takes different shapes and forms in different languages. While it may be fair to say that one single emotion exists in English, French, and German, hate is historically situated and culturally constructed. Hate is a cultural construction, guys. That means if we were alone, there would be no one to hate, technically, no person to hate. So we couldn't hate people if we were alone, right? And so because it's a sort of cultural development, a sort of evolution of the hunter-gatherer tribe mentality, and I would say women, probably their hatred is way more multitasked than male hatred. You know, there was this essay written about Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French emperor, you know, and so he was a next level emperor when it came to tactics and running an empire, but he was in love with this woman called Josephine, and Josephine had, believe it or not, kind of cast the spell on Napoleon. You know, this is kind of like how like men in ancient times, like piety. That means a woman's beauty can cast the spell on a man. You know, from an ancient point of view. Okay. And this has been in so many cultures. You know, there are women who they embrace their outer realms fully, and then there are women who embrace their inner realms fully, right? And those women that embrace their outer realms actually can, you know, enchant men. You know, I feel like Instagram is pretty much enchanting everybody. Yeah. Oh my God. But what I'm trying to say is that Napoleon was he was locked into an inner realm by Josephine. And so this emperor of France, who had lived for the empire, at the end of his life, his last words are, Josephine, Josephine, why? So, what I'm trying to say is that hatred is, I mean, not what I'm saying, it's as if it's being suggested that hate is a cultural simulation. For me, because we have free will, we can't say epigenetics is the reason only, right? We can't say there's hatred because there's a circumstance only happened. There's an inner environment. It's about memory management. Memory management means how you choose to keep the world behind your eyes as you go on into the next moment, the next moment, the next moment, the next moment. It says, thus, a certain relationless hatred is expressed in the French expression "je la haine," which has no precise equivalent in English. While for English speakers, loving and hating invariably involve a force, an object, or a person, and therefore a relationship with something or someone. Je la haine, literally, I have hate, precludes the idea of an emotion directed at a person. Guys, this is incredible. French people have next level emotional management. You know. I don't know how like common it is between all French people, but imagine having a psychology that says I hate something. It's a conditional hatred, right? And imagine having a psychology which is unconditional hatred. That means you could be a person in a perfect moment and you'd be like, I don't like this. You know, it's like I have hatred in me, but not hatred pointed at anything. Right? So in ethnolinguistics, I would say that is a sort of meta angle to hate. In religion, of course, we can say hatred is the devil. You know, that means it's like the more a person destroys the elegance of what has developed, the more they will feel they don't deserve to be a human being. The more you act on your hatred, the more you dehumanize. When you completely dehumanize, you will be an animal even to animals. What that means is dehumanization leads to cornered individual psychology. The cornered individual psychology retaliates as a mutated human idea. That means those people who hate a lot, they mutate. That means, let's say you're a person, you're like, I'm kind of shocked to say that we have people like this in history, but we do, that there are some people who, for example, they're sexist. They just hate men, or they just hate women, you know? You have people who are, in some sense, they hate all other races, they love their own race, for example, you know? And then you have people who hate those who hate even, you know? And so I'm telling you, there's so many different psychologies on this planet that it's like not only is everybody hating their own perception. Do you know anybody who has hated? They're literally hating their own mind's creation. You know, this is why love is smart. Because love is like, all right, the moment is cool enough to pursue, to continue. Because imagine everybody was just destructive all the time. We would never get to see what civilization looks like. That means without love, the species won't have a decent enough psychology in the future to work together to build something new. That means, what is teamwork? Like, let's say there's a team of 5 people, or a team of 5 senses. It's as if all the senses have to perform, and it's as if in a team project, literally every person has to dedicate their total inner realm for the evolution of one outer realm thing. I could totally see primary school, we're going to teach everything about health to children. Middle school, we're going to teach everything about psychology to children, about the abstract dimensions of knowledge, or the abstract pillars that keep knowledge. And then in high school, it's going to just be teamwork simulations maxed out in remarkable ways, right? That means even the educational system is not taking advantage of the educational system. The potential. And if we consider, it's not just you can hate an object, or, you can hate a subject. A person can hate time. A person can hate who they were in their past. A person can love who they were in the past. A person can hate who they are being right now. A person can love who they are being right now. A person can hate who they will be in the future. A person can love who they will be in the future. And the most important thing about loving your future self is to realize your future self is the next sight after the void. Our future self is an unknown state of being. Right now, human beings are manifest as a known state of a sort of doership, identity-based doer. Imagine you're someone who hates the idea of hate. That's a great philosophical paradox. The person's like, Mr.Within, I have so much hatred, but my hatred is for hatred. And I would say, if you hate hatred, you in some sense have to realize that no ideological system can own man. Ideas from the beginning of time have attempted to possess the human being. But novelty in the psychology and the future is the guardian angel of the present from its own past. That means if we get a species that envisions a great future, we have literally shielded the species from the cruelty of its past, the hatred it had in the past. And I'll say this, guys, hatred is also rejection. Do you know? Like, I know this. I've seen enough videos online to know this. To know this in human psychology, that especially, for example, for men on the planet, due to a more natural conditioned privilege of expressing rage and anger and hostility, it's as if there is a reason. Christopher Hitchens was in this kind of like feminist podcast. He was talking about how women are the gentler, the fairer sex, the gentler sex. That means it's like there's levels of gentleness that it's as if women have access to, which I think men can never, just based on how, at the epigenetical, how the culture raises one to themselves. And the future is very strange, because I know it's going to be multidimensional, and multidimensional means it's not just like 2 dimensions that are having a dualistic relationship. It becomes 2 infinite dimensions having infinite relationships, in the future. So human psychology in the future might get to a phase where I've said that the educational system may in the future experience an apocalypse, and I'm saying this as a philosopher, an apocalypse where suddenly we realize the language threshold. We realize that the world has been a story, but is it just a story? People are paying ridiculous amounts for education on the planet. It's as if education, of course, in some countries should be free, and it has to be free in the future. If it's not free, if an educational system is not free, it's the biggest sign that the nation doesn't have the best interest of the citizen in mind. And of course, there has to be there will be economical contradictions here, because it's as if like right now universities are, believe it or not, like businesses. We're living at a time where the economical sector possessed the educational sector. So right now in 2021, there could be the greatest universities listening to me, but I will tell you in 2021 a university doesn't exist. There is no true educational system. It's just training. It's employment training. It's not for the sake of what we know as creatures in the realm. Even if it is so goddamn quiet. It's so secluded and made in a hierarchical system elite that we have forgotten what knowledge is like water for the thirsty mind. Right? And imagine you realizing there is so much information that can change one's attitude, and your species is functioning under just one monothoughtism. It's terrifying when you realize how advanced we are and how we're living. You sometimes have to hate yourself in the past to become something that self breaks. It's as if like a best way to heal is achievement. But what is achievement? There's an achievement in the sense of we achieve something in comparison to intelligence outside of ourselves, and then a sort of achievement in comparison to the intelligence that we are. Like when I give a talk, I have access to my past self, who I was yesterday, and I keep trying to see if I can access a new dimension, So anyways, as long as this is my personal view, as long as there is any duality, as long as we identify as characters in a story, hate will continue. And those who love will be like, why is there hate, Mr. Within? And I'll be like, because the good people are keeping evil here. And the evil archetype is keeping the good archetype. That means if it's literally yin yang. That means imagine there was just only two dimensions to a world. And one world, it was a world of chaos with a small circle of goodness, and the other was a complete world of order with a small circle of chaos. That means even the lords of chaos in the realm know that order's innocence cannot be touched, and the lords of the greatest order in the realm, they know that chaos's innocence can't be touched, because ultimately that state before individualistic momentum is a state of empty sight. That means you bypass hatred by it's kind of hard what I'm saying. I'm saying like in the outer realms, because we have an individual body and we're moving in the world, they tend to make the inner realms want to see character in a world, kind of storytelling. Our psychology is pretty much telling a story to itself in the void. Now, the hatred will stop if there is fulfillment. That means, let's say somebody hates their, let's say there was a parent on this planet and the parent beat the shit out of the kid, out of their child. And sorry for saying this, but this has been the reality. The more we go in past, the more parenting was like psychosis. I read something about, like, I'm not going to share the story because it'll bring down the energy of the moment, but there has been a level of human cruelty on this planet that we have to be careful not only about a person appearing as a human being, but how much of their psychology actually cares for the evolution of the human idea. You know, that's the only way we can trust the world. If we don't have to agree, like neighbors don't have to agree, they just have to be like, okay, they don't have to agree, but they have to agree on the just one singular point, right? It's as if, like, imagine if, like, let's say right now, or let's say in the future, suddenly, instead of there being one alien that comes to make contact with humanity, let's say it's a party bus. And so we see like 10 or 20 types of different extraterrestrials land at the same time on Earth. We will at that point feel like our species is the only family we know at that party, Martin Luther King Jr. has this quote I've shared in the video description. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Guys, it is true. This is one of those legendary sentences that if there was a museum of language, this sentence would be in it. But darkness cannot drive out darkness because darkness can add to darkness. Only light can drive out darkness, right? And so there has to be a light. So if somebody is in a state of hatred, you're like in the shadows of civilization. Let's say you're an angry person, violent person, cruel person. You're a person who, when you walk in the street, you still haven't noticed that every person has an inner life where they're walking in a world of their own perception, right? And let's say the moment you realize how multidimensional this world is, hatred doesn't make sense. They'll be like, what dimension of that, what I'm seeing am I hating, and how much of what I'm seeing is actually the whole thing I'm seeing, that I can hate even. Buddha gave an advice about anger. I think the same advice can be used for hatred. Buddha says anger is like burning coal in your hand. Whenever you get angry, not only your own hands burn, but the coal, who you throw the coal on also burns. So hatred doesn't destroy one's own inner realm. Hatred also destroys one's outer realm, because in hatred, something doesn't deserve or something shouldn't deserve. There's that kind of psychology. And it's all about how we are using our energy to be something. Isn't that incredible? That means all psychology is an attempt. And it's as if the body's like, I'm going to stick around. And the mind's like, if my body's going to stick around, I might as well, play the games of, physical reality, That means imagine you suddenly teleported and you found yourself in like, the pilot's cabin, or inside a ship, okay? Like just driving the ship, right? You would probably drive the ship if you teleported into a ship and you were you had the steering wheel or whatever. or the command system at your attention. So similarly, we get teleported into archetypes, which are reactions to an archetype that is already in the moment. There was a time, guys, where I lost a bunch of these talks I give, and I had a sort of, I can't say I had hatred, but I had a hatred for myself, for my own carelessness. And I remember in that moment, I realized hatred is so dehumanized. I can't tell you. That means if somebody shows hate, that person most likely will unconsciously not be able to control themselves. You know. But let's say you're someone who has hate, and let's say it's like two Olympians, two Olympic athletes, and these two Olympic athletes are they're competing with each other and they hate each other. And their hatred can inspire. You can use your anger as inner training, right? Like, what did Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z, this anime, do when Goku surpassed him in power? He pretty much got angry, and he took his anger out on himself in the form of training. That means if, let's say, you're an angry person, and let's say someone is in a situation where there's domestic violence, all that the person in the domestic violence situation has to do is to suggest the person being violent to express the outlet on something else. That means, let's say, if there's a husband who has an angry wife, or let's say there's a wife who has an angry husband, like, there is literally like a kickboxing mat hanging from the ceiling in every house where there's domestic violence, right? And instead of physical contact, it's as if the person gets rid of the anger, but not in a way where it has destructive consequence. Because that's the biggest regret in life, where there was something was possible and we prevented it, right? That's why some people look at like cruel institutions, their leaders, and they're like, how can you sleep at night? And the person is so dehumanized, the evil person, you know? Think about like the movie Simpsons, you know? Sorry, not the movie, the show Simpsons, and Mr. Burns in Simpsons. He had reached a certain level of his own inner realm narcissism, egotism, self-truth only, that it didn't matter for him if he like fed an employee to crocodiles or something. You know, he was dehumanized, right? And that's the thing. This is why evil never wins on earth, because this isn't the room for evil activity. The human life is a room for intelligent activity. That means anytime there's even too much artificial goodness or too much, you know, extreme evil, you know, it's as if the lords of karma of the realm are like club bouncers. You know what I mean? They will just automatically kick it out. You know why? Because there is greater dimensions where, in a fractal way, every archetype is being standing. That means right now, as I'm giving this talk, okay, let's say they're in another dimension. Right now, let's say I'm in the fourth, space-time continuum. You know, four dimensions of the space-time continuum. You know, and right now I am, let's say, a self. You know, a type of self. You know, let's say I'm a good self. You know, in a good world or whatever. Or let's say I'm a good. Let's say okay. I'll kind of say it. Let's say I'm a bad person in one angle in a good world, and I'm a good person in a bad world. Literally imagine right now, if I identify as a good person, in the beyond the fourth dimension, my greater self becomes a greater good person. If I identify as a bad person, my greater self is being the greater bad person. Do you know? If in a parallel dimension humanity has collectivized, if in other dimensions an advanced civilization has been built, then our dimension cannot ignore its future. That means, the only thing sometimes I wonder when I give these talks is like if history is gonna be like, yeah, Mr. Within, an advanced civilization will inevitably be built. Doesn't matter if you talk about it or anyone else. Sometimes I feel the logos has it's as if like the divine assures that there are no accidents. In a divine realm, there can be no accidents. It's as if it's the will of what is meant. Religion is the only ideological system that acknowledges that the concept of predestiny, where it's as if every person's life is written in a sort of book. It's recorded, it's documented, right? Can you imagine being someone alive in the 6th century and hearing that? Like, your mind would be blown by the concept that there is even such a thing as destiny, And destiny to the secular mind should be perceived as karma, and to the religious mind it should be seen as God's will, pretty much. I mean, in a religious society, it's like there's no people, God's will and everything. If you look at this picture of the brain, I mean, it's a bit hard to read. It says the frontal lobe, executive functions, thinking, planning, organizing, and problem solving, emotions, and behavior control personality. You know why did we give that to the frontal lobe? Because the frontal lobe is like the ego's seat. Then we have the motor cortex, that part of the brain which is responsible for movement. We have the sensory cortex. All our senses are where the crown chakra is, hilariously. Our I don't know how to pronounce it, parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is attributed to perception, making sense of the world, arithmetic, spelling. I mean, you can't say like the hand is just being the hand. The hand is being the whole body, guys. So even though right now in this diagram you are seeing like different parts of the brain, but the brain has access to a uniform expressionism of itself, right? That means we don't say the person moved their hand, the person moved their body, and their hand was a part of their body that moved. We have the, I have no idea how to say this, occipital lobe, which is relevant to vision, and then the temporal lobe, memory, understanding, and language. I mean, this is, then there's the amygdala, which is kind of like the stem of the broccoli, So guys, hatred, it is an unnecessary delay in human civilization. I want to go into a quote tunnel of just different people that they have perceived hate differently in history. Martin Luther King, I read that quote. One of the most powerful quotes and algorithms for an advanced civilization, I would say. Herman Melville says, "To the last I grapple with thee, from hell's heart I stab at thee, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee." You could say there is a rebellious notion to hate, where in rebellion it's for a just cause, but it's a messy way of bringing justice. Louis C.K. says, "I don't stop eating when I'm full. The meal isn't over when I'm full, it's over when I hate myself." All right, God, that's too far. Eminem says, "I say what I want to say and do what I want to do. There's no in between. People will either love you for it or hate you for it." You know what? People don't know Steve Jobs said something incredible. He said people don't know how to look at your product. Let's say you're someone and you're selling a product in the market. You know, Steve Jobs says, you gotta tell people what your product is. That means it's our introduction, right? So that means when I give this talk, let's say 8 billion people heard it, there would be 8 billion versions of this talk going around in the minds of the species, you know? That means everything I'm seeing through my own memories and experiences is one level, and every time a person hears another person's talk, it's as if, you know what it is? It's as if a satellite from my inner realms has made it to your universe. From my inner verse has made it to your inner verse. It's as if, like, we surpassed liftoff. Communication is a sort of liftoff. It's a liftoff into expressionism as the moment, as the whole moment. Jimmy Connor says, I hate to lose more than I love to win. Arnold Schwarzenegger says, the worst thing I can be is the same as everybody else. I hate that. William Congreve says, heaven has no rage, like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury, like a woman scorned. Francis of Assisi says, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Hannah Moore says, forgiveness is the economy of the heart. Forgiveness saves the expense of anger, the cost of hatred, the waste of spirits. Wow. Wow. Guys, this quote is incredible. The waste of spirits. That's literally what I mean, is when we can build an advanced civilization, and if we don't, it's like, you know, that's the biggest loss of the species. Anton Chekhov says, love, friendship, and respect do not unite people as much as a common hatred for something. Pervez Musharraf says, Islam teaches tolerance, not hatred, universal brotherhood, not enmity, peace, and not violence. Right, but guys, a part of being human is the freedom to look at things. And anytime we find ourselves in any system, it doesn't matter if it's religious or non-religious, any ideological system that does not provide freedom. Let's say if you're religious, it's like God's creation has to be free, because God's like the justification. You know, if you're secular, the human being has to be free, regardless of whatever ideological system there is. You see? So I would say all religions have a peaceful dimension, but really the reason they have a peaceful dimension is because there were peaceful people. And if the world is not filled with peaceful people, it doesn't matter what ideology we wear, we clothe our minds in. You know, it's as if we haven't cared for the truth that was here before our language was. This is why every religion says religion has to say killing is a sin. Why? Because it's God's creation we're destroying. You know, that means when there were religious wars, God's creation was fighting God's creation. Such a stupid thing to happen, you know. So, you know, I can't understand how a religious person can be violent when everything's God's creation. It's bizarre. It's mind-boggling. You know, how there has even been this idea of retaliation. It means the cultural ears possessed the religion before the human ears, right? Because if we look at the human being, we're just a biological movement. Whatever we are, whatever transcendental origin we may have, right? But we're simply a human being. There's something remarkable about a nature where it needs no interpretation, right? So it's the same for the truths that we find in nature. They are being instantaneously, right? And all those people, you know, in an Islamic country, I was raised in an Islamic country, I could tell you, imagine a kid does a parkour trick in a busy marketplace, you know, And a religious person with a rosary would be like, mashallah, which means, like it's like, that's God's will, look at what God's will is doing today, right? That's the religious person, right? Personality. In some sense, you don't actually exist first. God is moving things, and you are just being a servant of a truth that needs to be redeemed, right? In religion, honestly, takes the person towards piety. Piety, in some sense, doesn't mean you act in a good way. Piety means you are honest to how, from a theological lens, God created you. And so people, they have children and they're like, God has blessed me with a child. But when they see another human being they call an enemy, it's as if they're totally forgetting God has blessed them with another human being in this empty cosmos. So really, there is more reasons for actually a loving, intelligent species than a hateful, blind one. Liu Chaobo says hatred is corrosive of a person's wisdom and conscience. The mentality of enmity can poison a nation's spirit, instigate brutal life and death struggles, destroy a society's tolerance and humanity, and block a nation's progress to freedom and democracy. Guys, it's very fascinating that there has been religious systems of governance. However, these religious systems of governance have not governed the whole system through, whether it's as if like we don't think about nations committing sins, right, or doing good deeds, right? For example, during the Japanese earthquake, Canada sent a lot of troops and people to assist. So that was like a good deed of a nation, right? But we don't have that. We don't apply psychology to ideas of collective movements, right? And I think we should start doing that, because we have to begin thinking of not just morality being limited to duality, but morality being a way that we found the most efficient way to look at the human being. And the proper attitude is that we don't know. Because if we act like we have answers, time will show us otherwise. So if we stay in a state of mind where questions are inspiring our development as a species, we in some sense do not get locked down in the image of the answer ideology. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. says, love is the master key that opens the gates of happiness, of hatred, of jealousy, and most easily of all, the gate of fear. C.S. Lewis says, look for yourself and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ and you will find him, and with him everything else thrown in. And guys, I remember someone telling me that there is the idea of Christ, and then like as a physical person, and then there's the idea of Christ's mind, which they some people call Christ consciousness, right? And Christ consciousness has a sort of singularity of the individual as God. This is in Christianity specifically. Singularity of the individual as God, the individual as what do you call it? The individual as the movement of the whole, as the spirit of the whole moment, as the will of God, and man as also God's messenger, three archetypes, right? So Christianity is perceiving three archetypes that you can say are angles to the universe in one archetype, but other religions are, for example, different. The idea, there's an idea shared in Christianity to be in the world but not of it. What that means is hatred is when you are of the world.
when you're acting as if what is here is the only thing that's here, right? This is why at least the religious mentality has a sort of humility that I would say secular society doesn't, in the sense that a religious person is more concerned about consequences than a person who doesn't feel there's a judgment day. You know. So you can say religion strangely is a discipline. It's literally like a sort of art form. Just like there was a martial art where there was like the crouching tiger, the tiger martial art system, the mantis martial art system. It's similar, with religions and anything else that can be used by consciousness. George Orwell says serious sport has nothing to do with fair play. It is bound up with hatred, jealousy, boastfulness, disregard of all rules, and sadistic pleasure in witnessing violence. In other words, it is war minus the shooting. Edith Cavell says, I realize that patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone. Tertullian says the first reaction to truth is hatred. I mean, of course, to any moment that changes, it could be literally an arcade game and suddenly the coins we've put in the arcade game finish, and the person's playing the pinball machine, the moment the coin finishes and they can't get the ball to where they want, they just slam the pinball machine. It's like, stupid machine, you know. And imagine human beings surpass hatred to a point where we don't even hate machines. We can't hate evil anymore because evil is just like child level. It's ignorant of the greater leaps of humanity, the greater steps that we can do. Francois de la Rochefoucauld says, if we are to judge of love by its consequences, it more nearly resembles hatred than friendship. George Osborne says, we must bring unity of spirit and purpose and condemn hatred and division wherever we see it. Lord Byron says, now hatred is by far the longest pleasure. Men love in haste, but they detest at leisure. Abdul Qadir Khan says, I have to ask God's forgiveness and not get angry because they come to me out of love and it's not fitting that I should turn to them in hatred. Yeah, it's like the hatred doesn't make sense, and even if it makes sense, it will make sense temporarily, right? That means if aliens were invading us and we had hatred towards them, the moment the aliens weren't invading us, the hatred would vanish. Right, so there's a conditional hatred that has to do with how things are happening in the outer realms. Then there's a hatred that can instantly be gotten rid of in your inner realms, right? And so I'm saying that most people in 2021 are pushed into states of mind where they think they have to be some idea, rather than realize their brain is like an instrument, and they have to live a type of life where they can activate. They can start playing this instrument. And when 8 billion human beings advance their communication and intelligence begins to multidimensionally restore civilization from its unnecessary chaotic dimensions, pretty much it's going to be as if the advanced civilization is like a sun is going to land on Earth. That's how profound the advanced civilization is going to be. It's going to be like the brightest thing that duality could ever see, William Ing says, a nation is a society united by a delusion about its ancestry and by common hatred of its neighbors. Politics, guys, is a hilarious game. Politics is a game where I would say emotions are not important. And in some sense, there is universal declaration of truth from every point of view. That's really what starts wars. Leo Tolstoy talked about this. In the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian Tsar's like, God's with us, invade the Japanese, attack the Japanese, and the Japanese were like, the universe is with us, attack the, you know, Russian Empire. So you see, empires have each tried to be gods. If you want to build paradise too fast, you become a dictator, unfortunately. This is why paradise, if it is to be built on the planet, it has to be built collectively, and it has to be not an image, because it can't be. There's too many unknown variables in reality for us to know 100% what something's going to look like. This is why literally everything we do is hope. Buddha says hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Alanis Morissette says fame is hollow. It amplifies what is there. If there is any self-doubt or hatred or lack of ability to connect with people, fame will magnify it. Yeah. Another reason, guys, I haven't gone to the public too much to give talks is because that's the thing. I don't know how to, if you look at the complexity that every brain harbors, the only way to actually communicate with the world will be through its simpler dimensions. That means in our complex modes of thinking, we're all different. In our simpler modes of thinking, we're all similar. Isn't that crazy? It's as if life's how we come to know life. It starts from simpler levels of how things are just being, and then the relationship of all these objects and subjects that are kind of like in a photograph of meaning. So I'm telling you, knowledge is like you first learn the photographs, then the photographs become a film. Then you realize you're not an actor in the film, you're a director in the film, then you become an explorer. When you become an explorer, you question the limits of the system. When you question the limits of the system, you automatically become a philosopher, because you start going towards the unknown. That means when a human being wonders about what they don't know more than what they know, and the narcissistic ego cannot arise. Mother Angelica says, when we begin to build walls of prejudice, hatred, pride, and self-indulgence around ourselves, we are more surely imprisoned than any prisoner behind concrete walls and iron bars. Eric Hoffer says passionate hatred can give meaning and purpose to an empty life. And that's true. I mean, you could say a person who hates is still a humanized state, right? If there is no hatred or love, then you're pretty much not being human in the moment. I shouldn't say you're not being human, but it's like there is no archetype. Like the more still we are, the less we're an individual, the more we move the individual's emotion, and very clear to see. Jim Goad says, my hatred is 1,000 times more powerful than all your good intentions. But let me tell you something that hatred will lose when it comes to good. You know why? Hatred is selfish-based. It's self-based. But love is selfless-based. What that means is hatred will lose because love is simpler than hatred. Because it's a simpler state of being, hatred, complexity will be filtered first by karma. James Baldwin says hatred, which could destroy so much, never failed to destroy the man who hated, and this was an immutable law. Maimonides says if men possessed wisdom, which stands in the same relation to the form of man as the sight to the eye, they would not cause any injury to themselves or to others. For the knowledge of truth removes hatred and quarrels and prevents mutual injuries. Niccolo Machiavelli. When you disarm the people, you commence to offend them and show that you distrust them either through cowardice or lack of confidence. And both of these opinions generate hatred. Yeah, because the issue is no relationship can be successful without trust. This is the core law of nature, right? If creatures cannot trust each other, they cannot be in the same space. You know? Just like they say there can't be two tigers in a mountain, you know. This is why the alpha psychology finds its own hill rather than being a follower in some sense. That means you can say like institutions are like the alpha psychology and people who follow institutions are the beta psychology, right? But the whole idea is the relationship has to be where it's mutual. There is no alpha beta, there is just one collective team, right? Pretty much I want to see human psychology become like, believe it or not, Star Trek is written in the stars for us guys. Marshall McLuhan, Buckminster Fuller, they called Earth Spaceship Earth. We're all on Earth, so Spaceship Earth is like we're all crew members of the same Earth, you know. If crew members start fighting, captains have to immediately break the fight and reorganize the momentum of the whole team towards the greatest achievement. That means it's as if an institution has dared emerge collectively. Let's say you're a religious institution or you are, you know, the whole thing is no religion can say they are loving if they don't care for the human ideal. If they judge the human ideal cruelly, no religion is loving. If cruelty is there, that means if cruelty is in the room, how can love be there? You know, if somebody says I'm being cruel out of love, that's in some sense, you know, an excuse. Because either human life sensitivity is progressing or it's slowing down. Hatred slows down the system, love increases its speed. So just that's the simplest, I would say, argument, you know. And when I say love, I'm not talking about like a utopia like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, okay? I'm not saying like a society that through numbness it has felt happiness. I'm not saying we numb ourselves into happiness as a civilization. I'm saying that beyond good and bad, there's modalities of perception. I'm a person who I developed a model in looking at the universe, if you could see me as a designer, and I perceive duality to only be 1/4 of reality. That means this whole time, people who have been judging good and evil, it's been 1/4 of what's actually been going on here. And how many other dimensions and relationships there are that we can have to the moment. Arthur Golden says passion can quickly slip to jealousy or even hatred. Yeah, that's something where I would say jealousy 100% leads to hatred, because you want to see your victory first, which is childish. Because everybody's victory is like our victory, you know. That means if it was Steve Jobs made the iPhone, everybody who bought an iPhone, they're like, yeah, this is our victory too, Steve, you know. And guys, in the inner realms, hatred has little consequence. That means right now, you know, imagine two people at a workplace, they're having a very nice conversation, but one of them actually hates the other one. you know. So it would mean as if like that's when the manager has a hole in the ship, you know. Hatred denies better workspace in whatever dimension. You know, if a person has hateful ideas in their mind, they may think it's inspiring, but I'll tell you, it's a low level inspiration. You know, it's like hatred is kind of like, I think it was Mark Twain or someone similar to him. He said, if you wrestle with a muddy pig, if you wrestle with a pig, you'll get muddy. And hatred is like wrestling with a muddy archetype. It's low quality, it's low resolution living. High resolution living is peaceful, because in peacefulness, genius arises. You know, in hatred, you can say like the nuclear bomb was a genius invention, you know, from a physical standpoint, but you know, cultural standpoint, it was like used for hatred. It was inspired out of hatred of the enemy. So, you know, I can't say hatred doesn't inspire at the same time, but I can tell you the inspiration of a multidimensionally efficient system is way better than a good and bad, you know, emotional system, right? Because, you know, it's like if we say people are if somebody is showing hatred, what if tomorrow they become loving? Right? What if Joker, like, you know, after Batman punched him in the face, he became a normal person? What if that happened? You know? You know, what if Batman and Joker, you know, decided to, you know, stop being a villain and superhero, and they started to create a film, you know? So you see, hatred is occupying a space of mind. So the person has to ask themselves, is there a better state of mind that I can be in aside from hating something and being inspired, you know? And it's all language, guys. A lot of reality is just how we act as if the stories we tell ourselves are us. Jean de la Bruyere says all men's misfortunes spring from their hatred of being alone. That means when you're not afraid of solitude, you can actually be with anyone, I think. Oscar Wilde says hatred is blind as well as love. I would say they're blind to each other as archetypes. Aeschylus says, for the poison of hatred seated near the heart doubles the burden for the one who suffers the disease. He's burdened with his own sorrow and groans on seeing another's happiness. Thomas Aquinas says, love must precede hatred, and nothing is hated save through being contrary to a suitable thing, which is love. And hence, it is that every hatred is caused by love. You know what he's saying? He's saying that if we are hating something, we have to have a spectrum of first loving it and rejecting that love. So that means it's like those people who hate something, they have ignored the first option to love, but their mind had to perceive that in order to have the hateful archetype. Joan of Arc says, of the love of hatred God has for the English, I know nothing, but I do know that they will all be thrown out of France except those who die there. Damn. Intense, you know, history. J. Paul Getty says, a hatred of failure has always been a part of my nature. I mean, to hate failure is like trying to hate your past. You know, you shouldn't really hate your past. You can, but I think the best thing is the past was just how far you reached the checkpoint in the space-time continuum. Tertullian says truth endangers hatred of truth. As soon as it appears, it is the enemy. Uh, Shiri Chinmoy says the word yoga means skill. Skill to live your life, to manage your mind, to deal with your emotions, to be with people, to be in love and not let that love turn into hatred. Bertrand Russell says contempt for happiness is usually contempt for other people's happiness, and it's an elegant disguise for hatred of the human race. Oh my god. Annie DeFranco says, God forbid you be an ugly girl. Course too pretty is also your doom, because everyone harbors a secret hatred for the prettiest girl in the room. You know, the thing is, the child hates what it can't have, but I would say the advanced communicator literally doesn't have enough reasons to hate anything. Just like Terence McKenna says, nobody knows enough to worry. We don't know enough to truly hate something, you know? Like, there could always be dimensions that were missed, right? Marcus Tullius Cicero says hatred is settled anger. That's an incredible description of hatred. Pericles says all who have taken it upon themselves to rule over others have incurred hatred and unpopularity for a time. But if one has a great aim to pursue, this burden of envy must be accepted, and it is wise to accept it. Slavoj Žižek says, I am what you might call abstractly anti-capitalist. For instance, I am suspicious of the old leftists who focus all their hatred on the United States. What about Chinese neo-colonialism? Why are the left silent about that? When I say this, it annoys them, of course. Good. Okay. Hoso Balu says hatred is self-punishment. There you go. Yitzhak Shamir says the driving force for the Arabs. Okay, this sentence is too political. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says God's truth judges created things out of love, and Satan's truth judges them out of envy and hatred. I would say truth is, like, religious truth is being seen as singular. Satan's truth is being seen as duality. So duality is where there's ignorance possible, even, right? So it's pretty much unity is, we're seeing the singular right now in society. The singular is love, and the dual is kind of like hatred, you know. But anyways, reality is way more than our language, guys. And lastly, or actually I'll read two quotes. Honor de Balzac says love or hatred must constantly increase between two persons who are always together. Every moment fresh reasons are found for loving or hating better. Swami Shivananda says forget like a child any injury done by somebody immediately. Never keep it in the heart. It kindles hatred. That means if you're someone who's had something messed up happen, or something that's causing you to hate something in the space-time continuum, Swami Shivananda says let it go. That means, believe it or not, forgetting revenge is a karmically more efficient strategy. You see, because karma will eventually, anything we input in the system, we will get out of it, you know, whether, at least from the Buddhist standpoint, whether in this life or other lives. Cause and effect is like cause and effect. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. That's the quote tunnel portion. Kushbu says you're in the chat section, you're no longer human when taken over by hate because you're reduced to your animalistic instincts. Yeah, because even the animal doesn't have a concept of hate, right? You know, so you can say, okay, here, I'll tell you a crazy idea, guys. Imagine there's two people, person A and person B. Person B behaves very cruel and violent to person A. Now, person A looks at person B and says, that person hated me, you know. Now imagine person A is in a room and suddenly a tiger is brought in the room. A tiger that has no ego of being a good or bad person. And a wild tiger attacks the person and the person gets out of the room. The person can't say the tiger hated me. Do you see? Hatred is a conscious selection. It's literally pinpointing our energy towards something. You know, I have had anger, guys, where I usually release my anger in my inner realms. You know what that means is like I break things in my mind. You know, that means literally like I throw geometrical shapes, you know, and visualize them break in my inner realms when I'm angry. You know, sometimes where to a point where my hand in the outer realms is kind of like, you know, like I'm literally slamming my hand in the air, and in my inner realms I'm just, the anger is expressing as like I sometimes get rid of my anger in my inner realms, imagination pretty much. That's like your mind's being your own punching bag, you know. If you direct anger to yourself, it can become hatred, guys. Be careful, whoever's listening. I'll tell you a personal experience. In 2016, I was in Italy in a hotel, and the hotel had 3 floors, and I was alone, just kind of touring Italy for like a few weeks. And when I was in the 3rd floor of this building, it was late at night. I'd come from the airport, and I smoked cigarettes, and so it had a weird giant window door, like the room that I was in the hotel, right? And it was completely at night, after midnight, and it had such a long way to, there was literally a ridiculous hallway to get to the elevator to go downstairs. So I became a bit of a rebel in that moment. And I go outside the window, and there's literally like maybe like half a meter space where you can stand, you know. And so I was sitting there in that corner at the edge of the building, and it was a moment in my life where I was angry at myself. And that anger turned into a sort of self-hate, where I was just smoking a cigarette late at night outside of this window, you know, and at the edge of this building. And as I was doing this, I was like, you know, it was like a self-deterioration. It was as if I was breaking myself to myself, you know, alone, right? And so I remember my psychology went where I noticed I was becoming more rude to myself, where the ideas in my inner realms was like, you know, you don't deserve to be here. You know, it's like, who the hell are you? You know, it's like it's better if you didn't exist. Like all these ideas came until one of the self-depreciating, you know, insult like inner thoughts repeated. That means in my inner realms, I was like, you know, you're worthless. And imagine that thought repeated again. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why did my mind say the same sentence twice? Then I noticed the brain, the subconscious is doing a loop. I stepped out of my self-depreciation simulation. And I, for a second, noticed the brain, in accordance to how tired the body is, or how probable the future is, right? It projects a sort of reaction to itself, right? So it could be that the mind is like its own film, and it could be a bad film sometimes. And if we identify with that bad film, we think everything is the problem. You know, there's a story of these grandkids who did this prank on their grandfather. They pretty much put a piece of cheese on the grandfather's mustache when he was sleeping. You know, the grandfather wakes up and sees the kids behaving like angels. It's like, okay, something's off here. You know, the grandfather suddenly smells the room and it's like, oh my God, this room stinks. He runs room to room to room. Eventually he runs out of the house, and he's like, finally, I'm free of the smell. Then he sees outside the smell of the cheese is still there. And he says the whole world stinks like cheese for some reason. So you see, it's as if like one thought, one inner film change the whole picture, and it shouldn't. You know, this is where the strength of character comes in. You know, where one learns in this life that if they don't honor their mind, they cannot use it. So the pre-human state of mind, pre-hatred human state of mind is a moment where we are watching and we get introduced to a reality where our probability of the future can't go forward. So the best thing is to be a free moment of being. And even if a person gets angry, or let's say you hate something for a moment, let the emotions come and go quickly. Don't let the emotion possess you into fixate you into a certain archetype. You know. There's this show that this narrative Japanese show called Shingeki no Kyojin, which I'm an incredible fan of. Like I love that show, the story of it, from a writer's perspective. And there is a character who his family is taken away from him when he's young by these monsters. These monsters destroy his family. And so the whole show is inspired by his hatred to get rid of the chaos that invaded him. And then he later on realizes the world is filled with chaos and order in multidimensional angles. Anyways, guys, let me see if there's a question. Justin says, is evil actually the opposite of morality and not opposite of good? Isn't there a significant difference between definitions of good and definitions of morals? Morality is both of them. Morality, you could say, is a subject. It's a field where we're studying right and wrong. What is right and wrong? That means anytime we have right and wrong type of thinking, there is a morality to the moment, right? But being good is one side of the coin. Morality is talking about how the coin is spinning. Justin has another question. He says, is there such a thing as the difference between natural evil and human evil? Are carnivorous animals eating herbivore animals for circle of life versus... So exactly, the answer is natural evil. There's no such thing. It's just nature happening. That means when it's how some people say it's the nature of a cruel world, where the gazelle is like, what the fuck existence? Am I seriously the one being beaten in this picture? So I will tell you, nature doesn't have psychology, so it doesn't have the concept of good and bad, or good and evil. Human beings have psychology, and we have consciousness of our individualism through name and form, and the inner character in the story we are can be good and bad in accordance to how the consequences of decision making went forward. There's nothing, they're not evil. Just because, cats eat mice, it's not like cats are evil. I mean, that's questionable if cats are evil or not, but but I'll tell you, it's like nature doesn't have that language. We have that language, and pretty much it means good and evil is like us living, it's our inner life, being conscious first, then our outer life. This is the danger of also pure materialism, right? Because it has no moral dimension. That means it's as if, why is a nuclear bomb bad? If we're all atoms, we could just destroy the world and still be atoms. You know what I mean? This is the danger of just pure materialism. But because we're a human being, we're not just a material. Like, there is no person who's just a materialist. A human being is a growing creature. Growing means whatever perception we have of the moment is expanding, just like the universe is suggested to be doing so. It's like the person saying, am I growing because I'm growing, or because the universe is growing, or the person can even take it further. The person could be saying, am I being good because the universe is good, or am I being bad because the universe is bad, right? And so the best way to perceive life, I perceive it at least, in a manner where, to me, it doesn't have to have meaning, and that way I free myself from ideological possession. If life has to fit into language, an idea eventually will possess you. You become a certain bannerman for a certain vision. To me, it's literally technology. Language is a technology. using your mind as a technology. The ego is an Iron Man suit. You can get out of the Iron Man suit. There, you come into a state where there is no morality, there is no duality, you know, or you enter the Iron Man suit and there can be infinite duality. You can infinitely be like, the lion was right, the gazelle was right. The lion was wrong, the gazelle was wrong. You can find so many angles. Let's say if the lion that eats the gazelle, it's actually getting the gazelle to go feed its children. We'll be like, oh, what a good lion. It's feeding its children. But all the children of the gazelle are like, what a monster. Do you know what I mean? Like so there is parallel dimensions to things, right? And an advanced civilization will not just be a world where there's good and bad, but there's levels to everything. Just like we can look at an object from multiple angles, we will be able to look at subjects from different angles, and we will free humanity and hopefully walk towards the greatest possibility. What else can we do? So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. Hatred is not worth the time. It's not worth your time. There's better things we can do than hatred in this reality. You know? And even if you have hatred, quickly get rid of it in your inner realms, or use it as some sort of creative inspiration to get it out of your system or whatever, right? But because there isn't enough time to hate a world when we're too busy trying to survive in it, you know? So, and about the subtitle, yeah, you know, I've pretty much commented on hatred and how it arises. So thanks for listening, guys. And love seems to be the efficient strategy, and love is not just emotion. It is also having an emotion of how great our future can be, that we don't feel burdened by anything, you know. That means it is true, like every day I wake up, I notice, sure, the energy levels are changing, how much I feel the vitality of my life force in the realm is changing, you know. But what can man do? Will be like, the future's gonna look cool, you know. So thanks for listening, guys. Namaste.